Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the what if.
Chapter 38 Search and Destroy. Sanji and Nami Group. Sanji was furious. Running down the main thoroughfares along the right side of the island, he felt like smashing every goddamn cart, storage container, or government official he saw into pieces. Oh, he had tried to calm himself down, but every time he did his eyes would wander to the wrong place and then his blood would boil. It was like picking at a scab. He knew what he would see, but he did it anyway. He looked. Naruto was making stupid faces at him again. Sanji grit his teeth and shouted, "Goddamn Naruto, stop desecrating Robin's pristine image or I swear to God that I will kick your ass, watch you explode, catch your clone smoke in a jar, and fill that jar with dogshit soup. I'll do it. You know I will." Naruto just laughed, and Naruto chuckled along with him. The Robin clone didn't even look right. He was lumpy in ways he wasn't supposed to be lumpy, his face was dumb, and he still sounded like Naruto doing a falsetto voice. For some reason, the clone had quickly realized that his very existence pissed Sanji off like nothing else and couldn't resist the chance to keep jabbing and needling him. "Sanji, focus," admonished Nami, who was running beside them. "Keep checking the sky and the road or we're going to be ambushed." "Of course. I'm ready for anything." Even though the combined assault forces had made a clean sweep of most of the city on their rush to the Grand Courthouse, there was still the occasional Marine intelligence soldier in the road from time to time. Nami had her new and improved Klima-tact staff at the ready, and between her and Sanji smashing people out of the way while Naruto whipped shuriken at any windows where people started pulling out rifles, they had been more or less unchallenged so far. They had made it about halfway through the city when they finally ran into a serious problem. Ahead, lounging in a small bit of green space at the foot of a well-manicured tree, sat one of the CP9 members. He was so still that they almost hadn't noticed him. The CP9 assassin, Jabra, was dressed in a loose, black getup that looked like a cross between a formal suit and a martial artist's outfit. The shirt was left unfastened to expose his chest, and he had cute hair, a long mustache, and a pair of ridiculous sunglasses. He stirred as they approached, standing up with a yawn and a stretch. The crew had just enough time to register that their attackers had somehow made it here ahead of them when the man spun in place and sent a Rankyaku kick flying through the air. Naruto barely dodged the fatal blade of cutting wind and went tumbling ass over teakettle to the ground, spilling Naruto as he fell. The black-clad CP9 member pulled out a flare, fumbled with it for a moment before sending it up into the air, then waved amiably at Sanji and Nami, saying, "Hey. Sup?" Nami responded first. "What the hell? Aren't you supposed to be taking her alive?" Jabra laughed, genuinely amused by her reaction. "Lady, there's no point in fooling me. I knew those two weren't the real thing since before I got here." He pointed to his nose. "It's this sense of smell of mine, you see. Your kid over there doesn't smell like the real lady." Sanji quietly cursed their shitty excuse for a ninja, then asked, "Alright, smartass, but if you knew he wasn't really Robin, why the hell did you even come here, anyway? Why send up a flare?" Jabra kept laughing. "Hey, the flare's just for pissing off Lucci. He's an ass and 3/4, but his nose is about as good as mine. He'll keep hunting until he finds the real one, and I'm not interested in fighting for scraps when there's something much more amusing running about." With no more prelude, Jabra dashed towards Sanji, his thin-soled shoes slapping against the rough pavement. At the last second, he completely changed his heading, redirecting all of his momentum to head straight for Nami. Sanji, however, was ready, jumping forward and intercepting the assassin with a fierce kick that sent Jabra sliding backward, hands raised in a block. Jabra raised his head, baring his teeth in a predatory grin. "Nami, I'll be fine," shouted Sanji. "Just get yourself to safety and let me handle this guy." When there was no response, Sanji turned to glance at the empty space where she and the clones weren't. "Oh, you're gone already." Jabra chuckled. "What a shame. Looks like Little Red Riding Hood's off to grandmother's house." Sanji scowled across at his opponent. "Red Riding Hood, huh? I figured you'd make a try for her. You've got that sort of look in your eyes. So you think you're the big bad wolf, do you? Buddy, you don't know the half of it." Sneering, his body began to transform until the man grew to monstrous size, his nose protruding into a snout, fur covering his body, and nails lengthening into claws. Sanji shook his head and cursed. Shit. Goddamn devil fruits, huh. Well, looks like it's my turn to play the part of the huntsman, after all. Soon after the fighting had started below, Rob Lucci arrived on a nearby rooftop and glared down at Jabra. Shaking his head, he moved on. Eni's lobby. Docks. Kaku flew through the air, easily outpacing the land-bound pirates below him. He didn't engage them in combat, because he had a mission. Destroy all of the ships the Frankie family and the Straw Hats might use to leave the island. He considered their assets. Currently there were 4 ships docked at the city outskirts. One was Navy Intelligence, one was Cypher Pole, one was the battleship owned by Commodore Flounders that had brought CP9 and the prisoners to the island, and the last was the cruiser that had been commandeered by the Straw Hats. The Frankie family's ship was nowhere to be seen, which he supposed meant that they had left it out at sea and come here riding their pets. Come to think of it, he couldn't see either of the tremendous sea bulls that the Frankie family had used to get to the island. Last he had heard they were being shielded by the 2 traitorous giants. Oh well, something to remedy later. It wasn't like 2 sea bulls could slip past him if he was guarding the gates. The way Eni's lobby was laid out, the docks were situated on the opposite side of the island from the Grand Courthouse. Passing through the entire city would bring you to the city gates. Then it was through the city gates and then across the thin pillar of rock that supported the island itself, at which point you would arrive at the main gates. After that, you'd reach the sea train's day station and the docks, which was the only way for visitors to enter the island. Unfortunately for them, it wasn't safe for the sea train or any ships to dock today. Kaku would see to that. Kaku savored the sea breeze in his face, descending from the blue sky toward the nearby ship owned by Intelligence. A single Rankyaku sheared off the central mast, much to the chagrin of the crew. He followed by destroying their emergency paddle wheel at the rear. Kaku wasn't going to sink their ships, though Lucci probably had intended that as his order. No need to cause more damage than was necessary. Efficiency. That was his watchword. Making the rounds, he similarly crippled the Cypher Pole ship formerly owned by Spandam, then moved to the Navy ships. A few sailors working to reclaim the Straw Hats' stolen ship took potshots at him as he tore its masts to pieces, but he was too small a target and moving too fast for them to hit. Targeting the cruiser first, he split the mast and paddle wheel with 2 mighty attacks. The last ship on his list was Commodore Flounder's battleship, and he felt a bit sorry as he approached it, still leaping off of the air 200 feet up. Sorry sir, but we did warn you, he muttered. If it makes any difference, I'll help put your ship back together once this is all over. I rather liked being a shipwright. Kaku began spinning in place, building up momentum for a spinning Rankyaku, when a squeaky voice from thin air answered him. That's great and all, Spook, but I'll do you one better. As Kaku snapped out his ship-destroying kick, he saw a mouse on his pant leg. At the very last moment it leapt off, raised one tiny leg up high, and then Commodore Flounders untransformed, bringing his leg down in an axe kick that drove Kaku's leg wildly off course. The blade of cutting wind carved a gash into the rocky surface of the docks. Flounders, taking advantage of Kaku's disorientation, punched the other man down to the earth. The impact raised a cloud of dust, but when it cleared, the CP9 member was unscathed, rising coolly from his 3-point landing. Flounders landed moments later, dagger drawn. Kaku began brushing dust off of his black outfit. Goodness gracious, what a pain. What's the meaning of this? I believe that we established the pecking order in our jurisdiction earlier. Flounders, expressing a similar feigned disinterest, began using his dagger to clean under his nails. Sorry, maybe I didn't recognize you. Mice are good at a lot of things, but faces aren't one of them. You called me Spook, up there. Seems like hogwash to me. I said, maybe. I didn't recognize you, didn't I? That's kind of an important distinction, Spook. There are plenty of spies on this island, after all. Besides, you might have jurisdiction over the island, but my ship isn't on the island, is it? Don't be stupid. You know as well as I do that our control extends to the port and the ships in it. That's basic marine law. Doesn't apply to the impoundment of a Navy ship currently pursuing a critical mission objective, insisted Flounders. Kaku raised an eyebrow. Oh, I'm sorry, I hadn't heard. What mission is that? Percival examined his handiwork, then continued cleaning. I'm sure Garp will give me something important if I ask him to backdate one. How petty of you, drawled Kaku. This is an order from the current head of CP9 concerning criminals of crucial importance, Kaku said, turning his head to face the city walls. Commodore, this is just disgraceful conduct. His words were interrupted by a wooden THOCK as a dagger embedded itself deeply in a dock post just a few feet behind his head. With a concerned expression, Kaku turned back to face the man he should have kept an eye on. What in the world was that about? Flounders just stared back at him, shrugging. Dunno. Must have been the wind. Kaku carefully considered his current opponent. Percival Flounders. Navy Commodore. Owner of the Vermin fruit. Model mouse. Kaku always kept note of naval officers operating in the area near Water 7, and it was clear that this man had some skill in one of the 6 techniques. Geppo. There were also rumors that the man had been a wanted criminal in the days before Garp had made him appear out of thin air, but nothing about those rumors was concrete. If Kaku had to guess his chances in a fight against this man, he would say he had good odds, and that was even before he had received his own devil fruit. The gigantic giraffe seemed a good match up against the modest mouse. But this was a fight he didn't have time for. Sighing, Kaku raised his hands. All right, you win for now. Keep out of our way and make sure no one makes it on board your ship. This lot is slippery, and if we end up with reason to suspect they're hiding underneath your noses, then nothing will save your ship or your command. Not from Lucci. With that, Kaku turned and left, returning to guard the city gates and await the Straw Hat's arrival. City. Zoro and Chopper Group. Zoro, Chopper, and their allotted Naruto clones ran through the city streets. They were having more problems than any other group. All right, said Narusuke. Zoro, I want you to listen to me carefully. Up at the next building, we're turning left. Zoro immediately turned left to face the nearest building and then leapt up to the rooftops. Once there, he turned left again and began heading back the way they had just come. No, Zoro, why are you going that way? Yelled Narusuke, as they all struggled to follow behind him. I said turn at the next building. You have to wait until we get there, you idiot. Zoro was unimpressed by his reasoning. Like you said, I turned up the building and then turned left, what's the big deal? Even Chopper was getting frustrated by this point. Zoro, if you jump up to the building to our left then turn left again, then we're going backwards. Whatever, said Zoro, growing impatient with their indecisiveness. If we wanna go straight, let's just go straight without turning. Swords flashing from their scabbards, the swordsman cut a hole through a taller building nearby and leapt through. Stunned, his companions took a moment to realize what had just happened, then began to follow him. Despite what he had said, he did not go straight. Suddenly having lost sight of Zoro, Chopper and the 2 clones were forced to follow him by tracing the rubble left in the wake of his destruction, ducking through a hole in an office, barracks, or warehouse, then desperately searching for the next hole again and again. They went left, right, leapt from floor to floor and, at one point, even followed Zoro's trail up a spiral staircase. Before entering the 6th such carved hole they had already thoroughly lost their position. Panting and bewildered, Chopper and the clones burst out of the final hole into the daylight and blinked to clear the dust from their eyes. Zoro was in front of them, and he had stopped. What the hell, man? Said Narusuke. Give us a chance to follow you, maybe. I've never seen someone with such a twisted sense of direction in my life. Then, he boggled, his eyes nearly coming out of their sockets. Wait, where the hell are we? Is this the entrance to the city? We're the first ones here. What the actual hell is going on? Sure enough, they were now at the gates that led out of the city. Somehow they had been led exactly where they wanted to be, and in record time no less. Not my fault if you can't keep track of where we're going, man, said Zoro. So, if we're the first ones here, began Chopper, does that mean we're safe? Where's Robin? Once again, Zoro readied his swords. No, we're not safe. Everyone, get back. We've got company. A black-clad figure emerged from the gates ahead of them, walking with a confident and long-limbed stride. Well, exclaimed a smiling Kaku, I'm pleased that it was you who made it here first, pirate hunter. Roronoa Zoro. You truly are as sharp as they say. Behind the rest of them, the Naruto clones started muttering angrily to themselves. Ignoring this, Kaku continued to talk. Out of all of the straw hats, you're the one I wanted to engage the most. I understand you pride yourself on your swordsmanship, yes. That's right, said Zoro, a sword in each hand. Wahahaha, laughed the CP9 assassin. Wonderful, you're already prepared. Excellent. You see, I know a thing or two about the art myself. Hey, Chopper, muttered Zoro. I need you to stay out of this battle. When the others arrive, go with them and help get Robin to the docks. They'll need help capturing a ship, all right. Chopper nodded, and then Zoro seemed to remember something. Oh, and make sure those two ninjas don't get lost. Narusuke and Naroban continued grumbling until the battle had begun. City. Nami Group. Nami, I hate to say it, but that was cold leaving Sanji behind like that, said Narusuke, running alongside their navigator through the city streets. Nami shook her head and reminded herself yet again that despite the fact that the guy next to her looked and sounded exactly like Sasuke, she was actually speaking to Naruto. Oh no, trust me, she said, emphatically sure of her words, you don't know him the way I do. For one thing, he can handle himself, and for another, leaving him behind is the best thing I can do for him. What's that supposed to mean? You haven't seen the way he fights when a lady is around. That's what. Narusuke laughed. Oh, okay, I think I get the picture. By the way, Naruto, she said, not that I don't appreciate the need to pull the heat off of Robin, but I don't think it's a good idea for you two to keep following me anymore. Huh, why not? Asked Naroban, peering quizzically her way. Nami sighed. You really can't figure it out. Look, I'm not really a fighter. If someone from CP9 finds me alone, then you'll have to come rescuing me next, and nobody wants that. Least of all me. So what do you want us to do about it? If we're here, then at least the real me will know if you get in trouble, asked Narusuke. Hey, we could run off in another direction without her, suggested Naroban, before Nami could say anything. But wouldn't it be suspicious if we're not being escorted? Questioned Narusuke. They'll figure it out for sure. Well, it's simple, then. We'll make a copy of Nami and we'll all go together. Dude, have you seen yourself? You barely look human. You wanna try improvising now? Nami had to interrupt at this point. Wow, I cannot understate how weird it is that you can have a complete conversation with yourself. You want to try making a copy of me? Really? Well, sure, exclaimed Naroban. I bet I can guess your sizes, and if we really concentrate, then we can. Okay. No thank you. Seriously, what the hell? Still bickering, the three of them were finally nearing the gates when a nearby ornamental fountain began bubbling over into a frothing cloud of white suds. The thin film of bubbles quickly flowed over the lip and began spreading along the ground. Nami was furthest away, dashing back from the unknown threat before it could catch her, but Narusuke slipped on a suddenly wet spot and fell, spilling Naroban into the cloud. In a moment he had leapt away, not even bothering to retrieve his clone partner before Naroban was pulled beneath the suds. What's going on? Asked Nami, backing away from the gently expanding wave. No clue, said Narusuke. Hey, you okay in there? Shit, said Naroban, poking his head out of the bubbles. Stay out of this crap. I mean it. Something's wrong with me. He was right. There was something very wrong with Naroban's face. And arms. And body. Nami and Narusuke both screamed as they got a look at the goddamn horrifying spectacle. Naroban's body had been smoothed, flattened, and polished until the result looked like some shiny tube creature. Holy crap. You look even shittier than you did before. Yelled Narusuke. Struggling to support himself, Naroban's frictionless hand slipped on the ground, dropping him to the floor. A moment later the clone exploded, even though nothing had touched it. Damn, muttered Narusuke, something in those bubbles breaks down my clones, huh? From inside the cloud of bubbles that was pouring from the fountain, a flare came screeching up into the air. After that, Narusuke watched intently as a woman emerged from inside the center of the bubble cloud. She had long honey blonde hair, a pair of slim glasses that highlighted her cold eyes, and a black fishnet dress that showed off her amazing figure. Slowly, she parted her luscious pink lips. That's sexual harassment, she stated. Narusuke shook his head and grabbed control of his eyes, while Nami watched with an incredulous glare. Not that I mind it so much from a guy like you, the woman continued, smiling as she stepped forward through the carpet of bubbles. You're very much my type. My name's Khalifa, and I'm rather fond of handsome younger men. It's a pity you're on the wrong side of the law, or we could really have some fun. Suddenly faced with this aggravatingly familiar situation while in Sasuke's body, Narusuke did the only thing that made any sense. He jammed his finger straight up his nose. Beside him, Nami began laughing openly. Oh my god, Naruto, why do I get the feeling this isn't the first time this has happened to you? She said, still giggling. Geez, that guy must really be swimming in it, huh? Yeah, you don't even know, confirmed Narusuke, finger still stuck up his nose. Khalifa blinked in shock, mouth hanging open from the unexpected rejoinder. How disappointing, she said, after a pause. I see how it is. You're not the real one either, and this is a complete ruse. Very clever. Khalifa sighed, tossing her hair back over her shoulder. Well then, I suppose I'll just be going. As Nami breathed a sigh of relief, Naruto ruined it by opening his mouth. Hold it, lady. If you think you're gonna be able to find Robin through my cloud of decoys, then think again. We're the only ones who know where the real one was planning to go. Nami turned a shocked glare on Naruto as Khalifa stopped and fixed her eyes on Nami. I suppose you're right, the assassin mused. Well then, let's see if I can drag the answer out of you. Naruto. Nami hissed, staff at the ready as she kept her eyes on the other woman. What the hell are you doing? Hey, don't worry, you got this, whispered Naruto, trust me. Just keep her busy for a little bit and I'll be right back. Stifling a startled yelp, Nami whipped her head to the side, but Naruto was already gone. The assassin watched this, a smile turning the edges of her lips. How sad, she said, oh well, this will be over quickly, and then I'll make sure to punish your friend there for jilting you. Damn it, Naruto, Nami shouted, already spinning her staff to produce bubbles of hot and cold air. I will haunt you till the day you die. City. Frankie Group. Goddammit you two, for the last time, where did you come from and why the heck are you following me? Frankie shouted as they rushed along the right side of the island, heading toward the docks through circuitous back routes. Narusuke and Naroban had hunted down Frankie after separating from the rest of the group, introducing themselves to the cyborg as the blonde guy from prison in disguise. To their surprise, Frankie had immediately tried to backhand them with an armored fist. The two clones had evaded the attack and were now following, undeterred, at some distance. Look, old man, said Narusuke, I already told you the plan. They're going after Robin, so we gotta distract them as a group, you know. Look, kid, I already heard your so-called plan, but it was so super stupid I decided to ignore it. You think I wanna help you just for kicks? Shit, you even knocked me off a cliff. Hey, you told me to. You said you could fly. You should be thanking me for getting you free, you know. Sure, thanks bunches, kid. But now you're causing me trouble. You know that those goons are after me too, right? All you're doing is making my life harder. The clones continued running after him. Yeah, I'm really not seeing how this is my problem, said Naroban. Frankie looked backward for a moment, tossing a glare his way. Watch it, kid. I said I liked you, but you're pissing me off more than I usually forgive. Why don't you get lost and go take a shit? Seeing Narusuke's shocked expression and sensing an incoming attack, Frankie turned forward and brought both armored hands up in defense of his face. Without a sound, the spherical member of CP9, Fukuro, had dropped out of the sky and thrown a punch with ridiculous speed. Frankie's steel defense was blown away in a single strike, and he stumbled backwards from the attack. The assassin's entire body was round, from his torso to his broad, neck-less head. He had a frighteningly wide face, tiny eyes, and greasy green hair. What was most unusual of all was the yellowing zipper that resided where his lips should have been. The man hadn't made a sound until the strike, and now he reached up to unzip his mouth. His voice when it spoke was unsettlingly high-pitched. Chapapa, you did pretty well to evade death there. They call me Fukuro the Silent Owl and you just looked so vulnerable that I had to attack you. Damn it, cursed Narusuke, turning to Frankie. Sorry dude, but we're just two shadow clones. One hit and we're toast. You think you can take him on yourself? Frankie growled in response. Well, since you were so kind to mention that, no, I'm not sure. All of my super-powered strength comes from cola, and I'm damn close to empty after blasting my butt back off that balcony. Totally awesome, by the way. Also, cola. What the hell's cola? Can you get more? Frankie reached into his chest cavity with one massive arm, grabbing an empty bottle and tossing it to the two Naruto clones. I've got no time in my schedule this week to argue with primitive screw heads who don't know the joys of cola, but if you want to make yourselves useful then I could use a refill. Both clones separated, abandoning their decoy ploy. Gotcha, man, said Narusuke. One order of a cola, comin' right up. The two Narutos brought their hands together and summoned a set of 10 original-style Naruto duplicates. With their chakra split even further than usual they would be completely useless in a fight, but it should suffice for a scavenger hunt. Disappearing in 22 different directions, the clones dispersed through the nearby buildings. Choppa, hissed the assassin. That wasn't Nico Robin after all. Huh, oh well, I still found our other objective. If I capture you, then everything will be alright. With a kick that cratered the ground beneath his feet, the immense man leapt skyward, dashing back and forth as Frankie readied his fists. Frankie grinned. Man, what he wouldn't do for a fresh bottle right now. As the fight began, Rob Lucci landed lightly on a nearby barracks. The cyborg was clearly losing this battle, which meant that at least one thing was going well. He paused for just a moment to watch the fight before leaping back into the search. Fukuro had this well in hand. It was only a few minutes before a Naruto clone returned with a bottle he had found stuffed into a refrigerator in a nearby building. Despite the quick turnaround, Frankie was dented, bleeding, and panting for breath, his hair flopped down to the side like a sad blue drape. Before Fukuro could make another attack, a smoke bomb exploded on the battlefield, and Naruto slipped in during the confusion, slapping the frosty ammunition into Frankie's massive hand. When the smoke cleared, Frankie straightened up with a wild smile. His hair flipped up into its normal all on its own. All right, you crazy kid, said Frankie, you've earned yourself a favor. Don't go blowing it all in one place, ya hear? Great, Gramps, said Naruto, dispersing all but one clone, so are you gonna show me what being a cyborg is all about, or what? Frankie smiled, cracking his knuckles as he kept his eye on the CP9 member staring at him from the other end of the street. Alright, but lemme warn ya, this might get a little intense for brats just out of diapers. Especially for someone who doesn't even know about hydraulics. You see, I changed when I became a new person. Before, I was just a man, but when I altered my organic bits and pieces I became something different, something new, something beautiful. Wait, what? What are you? Naruto's eyes flicked reflexively down towards the cyborg's speedo, then he immediately regretted it. Every bit of my flesh that used to define me as a man has evolved. What was once an ugly caterpillar has transformed into a butterfly, and now you'll get to see the results of my journey. Whoa, dude, I mean, well, is this really the time for that now? Ignoring Naruto, Frankie grabbed his hips and thrust his pelvis forward. Oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god. Form. Battle Frankie 36. KENTAURUS. With ratcheting noises, gouts of steam, and a number of explosive jolts of movement, Frankie's body came apart at the seams. His legs and rear half split mechanically down the middle then extended forward. His torso hadn't moved, but now his lower half jutted forward impudently, looking like a laughably incompetent child had been told to play pin the head on the centaur and then pinned it on the wrong end. Still, Naruto was relieved. Oh man, that's totally not what I thought you were going to do. I thought you were gonna drop your pants or something. Frankie reached into a hidden compartment in his chest and pulled out a spare pair of sunglasses. Replacing them on his face, he then turned back to Naruto and lifted them, revealing his eyeballs in a skeptical glare. Kid, did anyone ever tell you you're a bit of a nutball? Naruto gawked at the centauroid cyborg in front of him. I'm the nutball. But. He stopped sputtering and sighed. Just finish your transformation, already. I already have, exclaimed Frankie. grinning hugely. That's, whatever man, you're so damn screwed. Even the off-putting CP9 member looked vaguely concerned for Frankie's mental health. Then he ruined it by opening his mouth. Choppa, that transformation, that wasn't in the report. I think I need to call for backup. Oh come on, yelled Naruto. Frankie just smirked. I'm afraid I can't let you do that, compadre. You're super going down, and this time it's happening Frankie style, right here, right now. With an abominable motion that looked like a cross between an inchworm's crawl and a horse's gallop, Frankie charged, meeting the assassin head on. Chapter 39. Cat and Mouse. Eni's lobby. Sasuke, Robin, and Luffy group. I'm so sorry, mumbled Robin, holding onto Sasuke's back with all of her strength. I didn't believe it, I didn't think anyone could ever. Sasuke, Luffy, and Robin charged through the streets of the marine fortress on their way to the docks. Moving through the main streets they passed skirmishing marines and rogue Frankie family members, but with Luffy on point any potential threat was absolutely obliterated as soon as it was identified. Feeling the slowly drying damp patch on his shoulder where Robin's tears had fallen throughout their trip, Sasuke struggled to come up with the words to comfort her. I don't think anyone blames you for doubting it, he said, his feet striking the ground at a sprint. The Straw Hats defy common sense, after all. He felt her sea-stone weakened fingers grip his shoulder tighter. You were there too. Yeah, I guess I was, wasn't I? Then he winced, but don't thank me. Naruto's the one who believed in you. No, that's not what I meant, she said. You said, the Straw Hats just now. Yeah, I get it. I'm actually a part of the team, blah blah, blah. I already got enough of that from Luffy. Robin laughed, but in her state it came out like a small snort right next to his ear. Sasuke, don't make the same mistake I did. Sasuke frowned, but said nothing. Luckily he was saved the trouble of extending this conversation when one of Naruto's giant toads saw them and came hopping. Sasuke didn't recognize this one, but that was hardly unusual. He hadn't met most of the toads Naruto could call upon. It had brown, warty skin, very little in the way of clothing, and oddly enough a mane of unruly curly black hair. Its belly was covered with terrible scarring. Hey, how's Naruto doing? Asked Sasuke as soon as it approached, falling in alongside them in a hopping run. Jero, said the toad. I'm sorry. Jero. Why are you talking to that frog, Sasuke? Asked Luffy. It's not a frog. It's a toad. Now he eyed the massive battle-scarred creature carefully. At least, I think it is. Anyway, whatever it is, Naruto sent it. You think so? Sasuke exhaled hard and rolled his eyes, as Robin gently laughed on his shoulder. Sometimes Luffy could be a bit dense. You think there's some other giant toad running around for no reason. Look at him, he's a friend. I just need to figure out how to talk to him so we can learn what Naruto sent him for. Jero, shouted the frog toad, now irritated. The young ninja sighed. Naruto, this had better not be your idea of a joke. I think he's looking for someone, said Luffy. Jero, agreed the creature, who then began waving his arms and gesticulating wildly. Great, said Sasuke, but unless you can understand Toad Semaphore then we're out of luck. Luffy, however, just nodded back to the frog toad with complete understanding. Oh, I get it. You're looking for the blue-haired old guy. When the creature jumped eagerly up and down, Luffy pointed off to the right. He was going that way. Jero, exclaimed the frog, who then hopped off. As Sasuke continued cursing the outside world and all of its oddities, Robin began laughing wholeheartedly, barely able to control herself. She laughed until she couldn't breathe, shaking and gasping. When Sasuke turned his head, he felt her tears dampen his cheeks. You okay? He asked, but Robin just kept laughing. He chuckled. This display of intense emotion was unusual for the woman he had come to know, but she was basically still in shock. Even if she had been out of her handcuffs, he wasn't at all sure she would be up for a fight. Not that he hadn't tried to free her, he'd spent a minute looking over the lock once they had gotten away from pursuit, but this thing was high quality work. He was still sure he'd be able to pick it, but he'd need to set her down and work at it for a while. So, they continued to run through the streets, hearing the Frankie family's thugs yelling to spread the word that their boss had been broken out. Luffy and Sasuke didn't stop to engage them, continuing to run through to the city gates. Finally, they arrived in the square before the walls where they saw Zoro dueling the giraffe man from earlier. What the hell? Asked Sasuke. How did Zoro get ahead of us? We pretty much made a straight run for it. Could this day get any weirder? Zoro, yelled Luffy, you're gonna win, right? Kick his ass and come after us. Zoro stood before the mighty giraffe, covered in cuts and breathing heavily, then he looked back to Luffy. Damn straight I will. Kaku moved. Don't take your eyes off the battle, roar no Zoro. Soru. The giraffe man moved so fast he seemed to disappear, kicking off the ground several times in an instant. The Sharingan caught the high-speed movement in perfect fidelity, but what was even more startling was the speed with which Zoro reacted, his bleeding limbs flicking out like lightning to intercept the oncoming strikes. He counter-attacked immediately, slipping his third sword underneath the giraffe's blades to strike its body. Instead of biting deep, the blade sounded as though it had struck steel. Tekkai. Sasuke analyzed this technique as well as Kaku broke the deadlock and knocked Zoro away. Still facing the green-haired swordsman, Kaku nonetheless glanced over at Sasuke and saw him staring. Damn it, you whippersnapper. Stop staring at me already. It's creeping me out. Sasuke didn't respond, absorbing the interesting techniques as they moved to the city gates. Luffy, said Sasuke, he's not looking too good. Shouldn't we stop and help him? Help Zoro, exclaimed Luffy. Why? He said he was gonna win. But what if he's wrong? Man, you just don't get it, do you? Sasuke frowned as Robin continued heaving with quiet laughter on his back, but he wasn't about to drop her and help fight unless Luffy was on board. Instead, he continued analyzing the techniques he had seen. The Sharingan was capable of memorizing every shift in chakra and every flex of even the tiniest of muscles, updating muscle memory until it could be reproduced perfectly. So far he had seen 4 of these strange techniques in use, and each one seemed to be a combination of brutal body training, rigorously practiced muscle memory, and unconscious chakra control. His eyes could reproduce everything except for the strength and endurance, but his taijutsu training counted for a lot. Even now his legs itched to try out what he had just learned. Soru he could probably manage right away, even though his legs were still a bit stiff from the first Geppo he had attempted. A couple weeks of practice and he'd have both of them pretty well down. Rankyaku seemed like it would take a similar amount of training. The Sharingan told him how he could replicate the movements right now, but it was a useless technique unless you could get it strong enough to harm things at a distance, and he wasn't sure he was exactly ready for that. Tekkai was probably no good for the time being. His instinctual feel for the technique seemed to indicate that aside from the endless beatings he would have to endure as practice, something was odd about the chakra control method that those assassins had been using. He wasn't sure, but when he thought hard about replicating it he got the feeling that flushing his system with the chaotic and swirling chakra they were using to reinforce their skin would make it impossible for him to use ninjutsu for a short time afterwards, and he wasn't quite ready to experiment with that yet. Still, Sasuke smiled. There were so many fantastic taijutsu arts to steal out here. These people were ridiculously specialized in their own areas of expertise, and it showed in the incredible depths of skill they could display. It was as if they had produced an entire world full of meta guys, each one developing their own style. Actually, that thought made him want to shudder. Anyway, it was a shame he hadn't been able to steal these assassination techniques earlier in his life. His thoughts were interrupted as they passed underneath the walls. Ahead of them, just outside the immense city gates, Chopper was doing his best to stay hidden from the climactic duel between the 2 swordsmen. Behind him, 2 Naruto clones who had abandoned their disguises were waving them down. Hey, over here. As Luffy, Sasuke, and Robin dashed through the gates, Chopper abandoned his hiding place and rushed after them. Luffy, cried Chopper, tears matting his fur, wah. Help me. He said we had to capture a ship, but I can't do that by myself, and if Naruto's clones blow up then I'd be alone. What do I do? Come with us. We're gonna take a ship by storm, said Luffy. We might not have to, reminded Sasuke. Naruto still had a bunch of clones on the Mary, and if I can fire off a signal then they'll bring her around to meet us. The Mary's here, asked Chopper. I don't know. Naruto. You 2 are clones, right? The 2 Naruto clones nodded, running alongside them. One said, "Sorry, man. I'm a clone from about half an hour ago, but when I was made it wasn't looking good. They were already low on chakra when we started this whole invasion, and it's only gotten worse since then. The last information I got from the Mary was that there were 5 clones left and they were thinking of weighing anchor so the ship wouldn't drift all over the place when they were gone. They put a seal on the ship so the real me can triangulate its direction, but I dunno if it'll be sailing to the rescue today or not." "Okay," said Sasuke, "still worth giving a signal, just in case, but let's assume we need to capture a ship." "That sound good, Luffy." "Yeah," he said, "keep Robin safe. When we get past the next set of gates, I'm going in." Determined not to be left out, one of the Narutos spoke next. "We'll head in right now to start scouting for a ship, alright? See you when you get there." The Narutos leapt off, leaving Robin's guards behind. It wasn't long before they had reached the halfway point between the city gates that protected the city itself and the main gates that guarded the docks. This meant that they were now at the narrowest point of the rock pillar that supported the island proper. Thinking about it made Sasuke shudder. He obviously wasn't afraid of heights, but he still didn't understand how anyone could live somewhere that seemed like it was going to fall into the ocean at any moment. As soon as they got past the island gates, they would be off of this ridiculous death trap of an island and surrounded by the sea again. "Sasuke!" shouted Luffy. Sasuke didn't need to process the sudden call for information. Every ninja worth their salt knew not to dither when someone shouted like that. He moved, letting his upgraded muscle memory kick off the ground several times in an instant as he turned himself around. Rob Lucci had made no sound until he crashed down from the sky with a surgical strike, his finger extended for a blow that Sasuke and Robin narrowly avoided. Shigen. There was a noise of rock shattering as Lucci landed, then he extracted his hand from the earth, leaving a single drilled hole behind. Sasuke watched the man stand up with interest. That was the 5th technique he'd seen so far. By hardening the muscles and tendons in one's hand, you could punch at full strength using the surface area of just one finger. It seemed to be a refinement of the Tekai he had seen earlier, which meant it was similarly outside of his ability to perform it for now. Whatever. If he really needed to stab people, he had knives and a sword for that. Luffy, immediately sensing that Sasuke couldn't fight effectively while protecting Robin, charged the assassin and began a fierce melee. Fists and feet collided, with Lucci largely taking the hits on his iron body and Luffy dodging everything he could. Sasuke watched, unable to help. Actually, this was ridiculous. Now that they had other helpers, Sasuke should really be free to fight if necessary. "Chopper, I have an important job for you," he said, glancing at the young reindeer. "I need you to carry Robin for me." Chopper nodded, taking her as he shifted into a much larger form to cradle the weakened woman in his arms, carefully avoiding coming into contact with her seastone shackles. As soon as that was done, Sasuke drew his sword. "Straw Hat," said Lucci, blocking blow after blow, "I believe I told you that we would find you no matter what you did. Your game was amusing, but this ends here." He struck like lightning, and Sasuke knew a fatal blow when he saw it. His fist hit Luffy in the chest with the kind of force that shattered boulders, much less sternums, but Luffy took the attack without injury, rebounding off the terrain into a flurry of punches with his rubber-enhanced body. "Gomu Gomu no Gatling." Lucci continued walking calmly towards Luffy, evading every single one of the blows by bending his body in every direction. Kami-e. Sasuke took that technique in as well. Good grief. That was 6 different techniques from the same school, each one something that pushed the limits of taijutsu in ways that he'd never seen before. How many more did they have? He could feel his muscles eagerly requesting the chance to try out this newly coordinated movement. The fight changed in an instant as Lucci dodged a strike from the captain and then kicked him back towards the city like a soccer ball. Suddenly free of the fight, Sasuke's eyes saw the moment that the assassin's center of gravity shifted towards them, and then Lucci blurred. He all but teleported straight to Robin and Chopper, but stopped dead as Sasuke appeared, bringing his sword around for a decapitating strike. Tekkai. As the sword swung in, Lucci's muscles shifted in preparation to use the defensive technique. The sword struck the man's neck with a clang, but Sasuke was already hurling a kunai at Lucci's eye. The man's body control was incredible, shifting from rigid iron to flowing water in an instant as he slipped to the side of the knife. In retaliation, Lucci struck out again and again with a single finger. Shigen. Sasuke's body melted to the side as well, whipping left and right as he dodged a series of the scowling man's stabbing attacks. Kami-e. Lucci's eyes widened as he realized what he was seeing. Knowledge of the six techniques training style was restricted to Marines, and for it to be used right in front of him by a no-name pirate was absolutely unheard of. Using something wider ranged, Lucci kicked, hardening his body when Sasuke blocked the leg with his sword, both combatants being pushed apart from the force of the strike. Then there was a momentary pause in the battle. Where did you learn that technique? Growled Lucci. Sasuke smirked. That's nothing. Watch this, he said, holding his sword in both hands. With a breath, lightning chakra cascaded down the blade, and Lucci had one moment to register further surprise before Sasuke's feet struck the ground multiple times in an instant. Chidori Hayabusa. Thousand birds. Peregrine. Lightning screamed and chirped as Sasuke used his newly stolen Soru to shoot forward like a crossbow bolt, the Sharingan keeping his blade true as he flew, faster than he had ever before moved. Like this, the greatest weakness of the Chidori, its need to get into close range, was solved in a single impossible flash of speed. Lucci's eyes widened further and further in the moment of slowed perceptions, but then it was Sasuke's turn to be surprised. With no warning, Lucci's movement sped up, his feet moving with a swiftness that the younger man couldn't match. The sword moved to follow him, cutting shallowly into his side before Lucci evaded, and Sasuke skidded to a halt 50 feet away. Shit. Maybe the middle of combat wasn't the right time to try out a new technique after all. He'd need a lot of practice before he would be able to move the way this man could. He spun, looking for Lucci, but the man was gone. Unsure of where his opponent was, the ninja dashed wildly forward, flicking his eyes in every direction. He wasn't there. He just wasn't anywhere at all in the area. Even though the hit with the Chidori had been glancing, the coursing lightning should have made it at least a little difficult to control his muscles for the next couple of seconds, which meant this was the best time to grasp victory, but Lucci was just gone. He couldn't possibly be dodging Sasuke's eyes, so where was he? The only place Sasuke hadn't looked was underneath the island. Could he have leapt off the edge of the pillar here? Sasuke looked down, trying to see the man's chakra through the earth, but it was too late. Death. He felt it coming from behind him. Adrenaline flooded his veins and he spun, already powering up the Tsukuyomi for the one chance he had to stop this man. It was going to be too slow. Lucci had slipped around underneath and was now descending from above like the Reaper, the edge of his hand scything in for a decapitating strike that would kill Sasuke in one blow. By the time he saw the man, Lucci was only 6 feet away. In that moment, Sasuke felt more certain of his own death than he had in years. Then, at the same instant as he felt the Tsukuyomi powering up, there was a sensation of a second chakra bubbling up from inside him, one that he hadn't summoned. That was when Luffy collided with Lucci from the side like a cannonball, knocking him away from the battle. Suddenly flooded with relief, Sasuke deactivated the Tsukuyomi, feeling the second chakra dissipate as well. Whatever that had been, there would be time for thinking about it later. Sasuke! Shouted Luffy, leaping back to his feet and focusing on the unharmed form of Lucci rising from the dirt off in the distance. Get to the ship. I'll take this guy. Sasuke turned on the other man, glaring. Luffy, are you serious? You can't fight this guy alone, what the? Luffy's skin had turned red, and he was now so hot that he was literally steaming. Abruptly the Sharingan began twitching. It automatically analyzed the subtle motions of chakra and muscles for later mimicry, and right now it was telling him very clearly that he could replicate Luffy's current state by simply forcing open all of his own blood vessels and then pumping his blood using his leg muscles. This was, of course, impossible. Just watching it made his heart tense and his leg feel like cramping up. Or maybe that was just him using these new techniques without a warm-up. It was hard to say. Luffy, what the hell are you? Just go. We need that ship. He felt it this time. Some power, intangible but overwhelming, emanated from Luffy and washed over him. For the very first time he knew he truly understood what drove the crew's complete trust in this man. God damn you, he shouted, turning towards Chopper and running to catch up. Stay safe. We never leave anyone behind, right? You're damn right we don't, yelled Luffy, That means you have to keep Robin alive. Shit. Maybe it was better to let the man who was immune to melee attacks deal with this taijutsu monster, but that didn't mean he had to feel good about it. Gritting his teeth, Sasuke ran for the distant figures of Robin and Chopper. As he had expected, Lucci moved to intercept. Sasuke made ready to defend himself, only to see something truly unexpected when Luffy kicked off the ground multiple times, performing a textbook reproduction of the Soru technique Sasuke had just copied. Gomu Gomu no, jet rifle. He struck the assassin at point-blank range with a punch far stronger than anything Sasuke had seen from him before, even against the Kyuubi, and Lucci shot away off the edge of the rock pillar. How the hell had Luffy done that? Whatever. Hopefully it meant that their captain stood a chance at surviving this fight. Sasuke turned and resumed his dash away from the city. Fixing his sights ahead, he focused on the mission. Robin, Chopper, and the ships at the docks. Main gates. Leaving Luffy behind to fight Lucci on the tiny finger of land that supported Enies lobby, Sasuke, Chopper, and Robin were the first ones to arrive at the main gates. Those gates loomed ahead of them, torn open from the earlier assault, but once the three of them were through they would be able to take and defend a ship while waiting for the others to arrive. There was only one problem. The wide main gates that led to the docks were thrown open, showing a view of the marine battleship, and every other ship in the harbor was missing its masts. That left only one option and one hope. He'd have to signal for the Mary and then try his luck capturing the sole intact ship. Well, make that two problems. They were stuck on a simple road meandering down a thin piece of grassy land with no cover in sight. Terrain that might have been used for the defenders of Enies lobby to spot an approaching raid also allowed those on the docks to spot him coming a mile away. Maybe a mouse could have made it by undetected, but not three people. Actually, as he watched, a mouse did scurry by from the docks, likely fleeing one of the broken ships. Also, where the hell had Naruto's clones gone? Well, said Sasuke, since we're not going to make it by unseen, I'm firing off the flare now. Chopper looked nervous, but he nodded. Summoning chakra for one of the many cantrips he had copied from Kakashi, Sasuke sent a flare of fire into the air that exploded into a bright light over the main gates, and then the two of them passed underneath their shadow. He was never sure what made him wary all of a sudden. Maybe it was the fact that this was an excellent site for an ambush, or maybe it was just the adrenaline from being attacked by Lucci, but he felt, rather than heard, the incoming attack from behind him. Sasuke dropped down as fast as he could, and a strike from some sort of kosh or blackjack went whistling right over his head. He spun in place, sweeping his leg around to catch his mystery assailant off guard, but his foot struck nothing. There was a tiny tug at his back, and then a large hand grabbed the back of his neck. A knife swept in from his side, but Sasuke grabbed the attacker's arm and stabbed backwards with his sword. The grasping hand and knife both disappeared, and his sword connected with nothing. There was a moment of silence as he spun around. His eyes roamed the landscape, flicking here and there with his perfect vision and chakra sight. Chopper and Robin had stopped, turning back to watch him in concern, but Sasuke could tell in an instant they hadn't seen anything. Chopper, stay back. In fact, get her to the top of the gates for now, alright? You should be safe there. He didn't see Chopper's response, still keeping his eyes everywhere. Was his attacker invisible? No, he'd caught a glimpse of an arm out of the corner of his eye. He was fast, then, and very stealthy. No, if this assailant was really fast enough to avoid being seen in this terrain, he'd be quicker than Lucci. Sasuke couldn't see any chakra signatures from underneath him, either. There was something else to it. Well, let's test how fast he is, then. He burst into a sprint, priming his reflexes for the moment the assailant attacked. Dashing towards the ships in the distance, he heard a man's feet hit the ground behind him, and then he sped up. Soru. Leaping 50 feet ahead into the sunlight, Sasuke skidded to a halt and turned. No one there. Sasuke, shouted Chopper, standing at the entrance to the gatehouse, it's a mouse. He's on your back. A mouse. Hiding on his clothes. For just a moment Sasuke blanked out, not actually sure what to do about this. Finally, he brought his fingers together. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. A Sasuke clone appeared behind him, lunging forward to grab at the mouse, and he felt the moment it dropped from his clothes. Leaping away, He grabbed a kunai and whipped it straight at the falling mouse. The knife homed in unerringly until the mouse moved, kicking off the air to avoid the attack. Geppou. It dashed through the air in wide circles around him, a tiny gray blur that Sasuke could only follow with his Sharingan. As it moved, he saw the animal's eyes focusing on him with a human intelligence. Pretty good, kid, squeaked the mouse, and then it shot forward. Halfway to him, the mouse changed into an adult human male, 2 daggers in his grip. Sasuke pivoted to the side to avoid the attack and his clone struck out with a sword, but the man transformed again, dodging the attack by changing sizes and hitting the ground. The mouse rebounded with its tiny feet, transforming back into human form and slashing the clone as he passed, destroying it with a puff of smoke before returning to mouse size. This time, though, he didn't get away clean. Sasuke predicted the attack, darting in at superior speeds to intercept the mouse with a slicing arc of his blade. Surprised, the mouse flipped in air and transformed again, blocking the attack with both daggers. The force of the strike brought the man to the ground, rolling in the dirt before springing back up to his feet, watching Sasuke's torso while avoiding eye contact, daggers at the ready. Like I said, pretty good, kid. Pretty good yourself, said Sasuke, glancing at the man's insignia of rank that adorned his well-tailored attire. He couldn't tell, but the guy seemed like a big shot. You're the strongest Marine I've run into so far at the very least. And you know to avoid my eyes, which is something really special. I have to ask, are you stalking me? The man chuckled, his deep and gruff voice contrasting with the squeakiness of his mouse form. I suppose you could say that. I've been following you for quite some time now, but you probably know me by my title instead. Allow me to introduce myself. Commodore Percival Flounders, former boss of the Flounders, fisherman. I'd ask you your name, but I believe that's unnecessary at this point. Ah, mused Sasuke, you're the one who imprisoned us. How'd that work out for you, by the way? The man's lip twitched. Hey, watch your mouth, kid. It's just you and me now. And unlike anyone else you've fought out here, I actually took the trouble to learn all I could about your ninja tricks. You're not getting past me now. Really? Sasuke's mouth split in a wide grin. Since I already took all your other henchmen to pieces, I guess that means if you go down then we'll be free to take your ship from you, huh? I wonder how often it is that a group of less than 10 prisoners takes down an entire marine convoy. A vein popped on the man's forehead, so Sasuke pushed a little further. How far do you think everyone here will be demoted after we get off this island with everything you own? Flounders disappeared, scything inward in between heartbeats to appear at the location Sasuke had just vacated. He looked up. The young ninja was standing upside down on the underside arch of the main gates, cloaked in shadows and chuckling to himself. All right, said Flounders. You got me. I gotta admit that the Admiral didn't say you were this fast. Sasuke continued chuckling in the shadows 100 feet up, his tone turning cruel and smug. What's so funny? Asked the Commodore, frowning as he tried to figure how the ninja had jumped that high. Sasuke shook his head, shrugging his shoulders upside down. Well, it's just that he wouldn't have said anything of the sort. I wasn't anywhere near as fast as this before I came here. Haha. I'm so much stronger than I was even yesterday that I'm just amused. I came here for a rescue mission, not a training exercise, but it seems like I got both. Really? Asked Flounders, seeming disinterested but still holding his 2 daggers at the ready, stance low and prepared to dodge. Sorry to say this, kid, but it doesn't work like that. Improvement comes through steady effort and experience, even if a good fight or two might make you feel on top of the world. I'll give you points for the creepy laugh, though. It's pretty good material for a bluff. Now, the ninja's arrogant grin widened. He didn't say anything, just sheathed his sword and drew 2 kunai from inside his clothing. As Flounders watched warily, Sasuke moved into the same ready stance as his opponent, 2 knives matching him while hanging from the ceiling. The Marine frowned to see this obvious mimicry. That's just insulting, kid. You wanna try taking me on like that? It's your prison cell. Then he started moving, getting up to his normal speed and preparing to resume his aerial attacks. While he was still shifting his weight, Sasuke appeared right in front of him, appearing to teleport down across the intervening distance. He slashed outward from his center, and Flounders barely managed to turn his shift forward into a duck underneath the attack. Knives cut out fast and furious, with Sasuke pressing the offensive using unbelievable speed and flexibility, his eyes locked on the older man as they danced across the battlefield. Eventually, Flounders began switching back and forth between mouse form to dodge attacks, instantaneously appearing behind or above him to continue combination strikes that relied on moves Sasuke couldn't replicate. It didn't matter much now that Sasuke had his eyes on the man. He could see the fluctuations of his chakra system and the twitches of his muscles as if they were a step-by-step guide to his fighting style. Every time that Flounders disappeared, Sasuke was ready to counterattack. The Marine dashed away, looking to separate from the combat, but Sasuke moved faster, lunging in and slicing the man across the chest. There was an explosive noise in the distance and Sasuke paused, glancing up at the Commodore who stood in the shadows while silhouetted against the sunlight from the docks. Staggering backwards, the well-dressed man smirked and then shrunk, darting into an almost invisible hole in the ground. The battleship had just fired its main cannons, and the tremendous cannonballs were aimed directly at him. Sasuke jumped, kicking off the air again and again to gain height as the incoming cannon fire struck the ground. As it exploded, Sasuke poured energetic chakra into his system, once again relying on an untested technique. Tekkai. The explosive rounds knocked him away in a blast of hot air and shrapnel that cut into his skin, but the sharp pieces of iron that might otherwise have gored him were instead mostly deflected by the technique. Sasuke hit the ground and stumbled, readying for another attack to come through the cloud of smoke, feeling woozy and off balance. He had been right about the ninjutsu limitation. He could feel his normally well-ordered chakra struggling to stop swirling about. If he was attacked again, he might be in trouble. No more cannon fire seemed to be incoming, but he could make out the silhouette of the Commodore's chakra through the cloud of smoke, twisting and changing before his eyes. When the man spoke, his voice was scratchy, but deeper than his normal high-pitched mouse squeak. He began, I know for a fact you would have had no chance to train in the 6 techniques. I've followed you every step of the way from your island, and I also know you're among the first people to leave it. The smoke cleared, and Sasuke saw that the man had transformed into a very odd creature. Slim and gray, the Commodore had become half man, half mouse. He was still dressed in his fine clothing, but either some strange fruit-related magic or some ingenious feats of tailoring had kept it from falling apart. From a well-hidden hole in the back of his dress pants, a prehensile mousy tail slipped out. From the looks of it, he had actually become a little more slim and streamlined as a result of his transformation, and his whiskered nose twitched left and right in the smoky sea breeze. For that matter, you're already fighting with my style, and you hadn't even seen me before today. How have you done such a thing? Sasuke waited, feeling his chakra slowly settle down. If his opponent wanted to be cautious for now, then that was fine with him. He took a deep breath. You guessed it, he said, I can copy anything I see. Ah, so you're some kind of copy ninja, then. Sasuke blinked. Being called a copy ninja was really weird, considering that was Kakashi's nickname. Well, actually that's not really. Whatever, kid. Now you're going to be fighting me for real, and one thing you can't copy is being a mouse. Well, it didn't really matter what this man wanted to call him. He was going to win, and then there would be nothing stopping them. The Straw Hats could win this. They just had to finish the fight. Chapter 40. Falling Justice. Eni's Lobby Support Bridge. Luffy. 2 men faced each other at the halfway point between the docks and the city. One was a massive 12-foot-tall leopard man who was built more like an ox, panting from exertion but clearly in a superior position. The other was Luffy, who was bleeding from claw wounds all over his body, swaying on his feet from the exertion of sustaining the overwhelming force of his Gear Second transformation. Fighting had been fierce, but now, finally, Lucci felt as though they were reaching an end. You've fought admirably just to get this far, he said, and I applaud your effort, but you must know this is all meaningless. What were you even thinking? You split yourselves up, and for what? Scattering and escaping is a strategy meant so that even if some must die, some must also slip through the cracks. He chuckled, an odd growl echoing in his throat. But that's not why you did it. I can see you for what you are now. You don't even have the resolve to sacrifice a single one of your comrades here. So what, exactly, was the point? Were you hoping every single one of them would make it through the city unscathed? I trust them, shouted Luffy. Each and every one. Then you're a failure as a captain. That's what's truly pathetic about this. I witnessed each and every one of your comrades on my way to find you, and do you know what I saw? They were losing. Every one of them failed to stand up to our assassins. Luffy's eyes darkened, his teeth grinding together. For that matter, while it's admirable that you stayed to fight me alone, you've led me straight to here, the one place that any escapee must pass to leave the island. Straw Hat, you've doomed all of them. The only battle that matters now is this one. No, said Luffy, you're wrong. Every single battle matters today, and I believe that each of them will win. City. Sanji. You know, Sanji said, taking a last drag on his cigarette and then flicking the remnant aside. As a chef, one of the things I despise is an overcooked meal. I can't keep track of the number of times someone asked me for steak well done, and I had to go out there and give them a piece of my mind. The two combatants stared down at each other from the tops of two buildings, and though Sanji's clothes were torn and sporting the telltale signs of blood and scattered impacts, the wolf man's body seemed more or less unharmed. His powerful iron body was the most specialized in all of CP9. As Sanji spoke, Jabra laughed across at him. Sounds like you're a pretty terrible cook, then. Don't get me wrong, I'm a raw and bleeding kind of guy myself, but even I know the customer's always right. No, you're right, said Sanji, tapping his shoes on the ground as if testing their fit. The customer's wishes always come first. That's a fundamental rule. Then, Sanji smirked. Of course, sometimes you gotta make sure the customer knows what wishes to avoid if they wanna go home with all their teeth. Jabra barked with laughter, starting to circle around the other man. Man, you really are a terrible cook, aren't you? Apparently satisfied with the state of his shoes, Sanji nodded to himself. See, but sometimes you gotta work with what you've got. A real chef doesn't always get the grade A meat or grade A customers. Sometimes you just gotta turn up the heat and go with it. Alright, man, I'm done hearing about your kitchen stories. If you wanted to calm me down, talking to the wolf about meat wasn't the right way to do it. Alright, said Sanji, looking up with an unfriendly grin. See, the point is I learned something from a couple of special friends recently. All that heat and passion I have in my heart. It's real, and I can let it out whenever I want. Kicking the ground, Sanji spun in place on one leg, twisting faster and faster at each kick. The world became a blur. He had always known there was a fire inside him, and he also knew he hadn't really needed the help of two shitty ninjas to teach him how to burn, but now he knew exactly what he was looking for. The heat of the friction served as the seed of flame, and then he felt his energy transform inside of him. As the speed increased, an intense flame blossomed from around his leg. Diable Hambi. Stopping, he controlled his dizziness and turned to stare back at the shocked wolf man. It's been a while since I've had to serve such a shitty customer, much less cook such a shitty a wolf, said Sanji, feeling warmed by the heat that somehow didn't burn him. And you've got the look of an infested animal. Gotta make sure we cook you deep. How the hell did you do that? Asked Jabra, frowning in consternation at the man who was suddenly wreathed in flames. Sanji ignored him. So, my esteemed shitty customer. How would you like your meat done today? Battle started immediately as Jabra dashed to the left, but stopped dead as Sanji spun, a wave of flame licking out from his kick and flying across the intervening distance. Diable Hambi. Arroser. Changing directions, the wolf tried again, only to be boxed in by another wall of fire. Sanji danced forward step by step, each kick washing the battlefield in front of him with waves of fire. Jabra's attempts to attack from the side were stymied, and then he gave up as he took the first hit from the flame whips, burning his fur and skin. Instead, he switched to offense, dashing straight into the maelstrom. I already told you my iron body technique is the greatest in CP9. He roared, silhouetted by the fire. If your damn kicks couldn't hurt me before, they can't hurt me now. Jabra burst through a flame barrier with the smell of burnt fur, eyes screwed shut but claws bared, and Sanji dropped to the ground right in front of him, pivoting on his free foot. As the wolf swung his claws, the burning leg shot upwards like a spear, striking directly in the assassin's chest. For a moment, flames were visible shooting up from the wolf's back. Diable Hambi. Roti bien cuite. The kick struck the wolf's chest and the claws raked into Sanji's side before both combatants disengaged. For a moment it looked like the flaming leg had done just as little as his earlier attacks. Then, with a gasp and widened eyes, the wolf man opened his mouth, belching a cloud of smoke and steam. He hit the ground in a smoking pile, his insides roasting from the stored heat as his transformation ended. The battle won, Sanji turned, beginning to walk away as he favored his bleeding side. Solemnly he lit a cigarette, taking a long drag before saying anything. Should have listened to the chef's advice, Monsieur Bad Wolf. City. Frankie. The fighting between Frankie and Fukuro had been furiously stupid, and Naruto was still kicking himself for watching all of it. As time had passed, more and more people had poured into the street where the two warriors were duking it out, and it appeared the majority of them were gang members allied with Frankie. Cheering and jeering swelled as the size of the crowd grew, the Frankie family eager to show their support for their beloved boss who was still dueling in horror horse form. Then, just when things couldn't get any weirder, a tremendous toad landed in the street with them. It had brown skin, black hair, and a scarred belly. Naruto frowned at it, not recognizing the unfamiliar creature that was barely even paying attention to him. Hey, do I know you? He asked. Jero, replied the toad, focusing instead on the battle. What the wait, are you even one of the ninja toads at all? Which one of me summoned you, anyway? The frog turned an annoyed glance his way before saying, Jero Jero. And hopping further away, studiously ignoring him after that. Well, screw you too, then. This was ridiculous. In fact, as the two fighters clashed again, Naruto finally realized that he just couldn't stand any of this anymore. Holy shit, he shouted, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. I keep expecting to get used to that dumbass centaur form of yours, but it's no good. It still makes me wanna puke. How the hell are you still alive? Both fighters were breathing heavily as they separated once more, sporting bruises and dents from the vicious attacks. Frankie, however, seemed to be firmly on the losing side. You're an idiot, Cutty Flam, squeaked the monstrous, green-haired CP9 assassin. You might have gotten stronger and faster somehow, but that centaur form is no good in a fight. You'd be much better off if you canceled the transformation right now. Shit, I said that out loud. Panting, Frankie removed his newly shattered pair of sunglasses, replacing them with a spare. Unlike the concern that the situation seemed to warrant, he didn't look upset at all. In fact, he was wearing an open-mouthed grin. Well, don't get your speedos in a twist, buckaroo. You can't talk shit about this transformation until you've seen its final form. Quote. Final form? Asked Naruto. Final form? Cried most of the Frankie family, in unison. Jero Jero, croaked Yokozuna. Final form, exclaimed Fukuro, backing up uncertainly from the confident declaration. No, that can't be right. You're just bluffing. Chapapa. Oh, it's no bluff, buddy. In fact, you're gonna get a personal ride on the pain train right now. As Frankie began emitting steam from his joints, terror entered Fukuro's expression, and then he shouted his battle cry. Not if I stop you first. Fukuro shot forward with the superhuman speed of his training, but it was too late to stop the transformation. Battle Frankie 36. Kentaurus. Biped. Clanking and clunking, Frankie's centauroid form latched closed just in time for him to dodge the flying CP9 member's attack. Suddenly using only two legs for an incredible increase in mobility, he nimbly sidestepped the attack, allowing Fukuro to blast past him. In the moment Fukuro flew by, Frankie grabbed him by the leg. Pulled along by the CP9 member's momentum, both fighters soared into the distance and collided with a building, bringing it tumbling to the ground in a shower of rubble. Naruto watched this in stupefied silence. All the cyborg had done was detransform. When the dust cleared, Frankie had both of his fists buried deep in the other man's enormous mouth, and he was grinning from ear to ear. Meanwhile, Fukuro's eyes were wide, his arms flailing back and forth uncontrollably. Whoa there! Exclaimed Frankie. Don't move, Skippy, or I might just go off. Way you! Hinker, oing! Shouted the suddenly sweating Fukuro, forced to talk around the metal fists. Told you my final form would turn this around. You see, With 2 legs I'm much faster, aren't I? It's a true evolution in fighting technology. Ash. O.T. Ru. Ash IH Poshiful. Oh, it's very possible. And you know what? Frankie brought his wide grin in closer, staring the fat man straight in the eyes as his voice lowered to a threatening rumble. I've never let anyone live who's seen my final form. Naruto honestly began leaking tears at this point. He couldn't help it. This world was just too stupid. Oh, Aunt Kill. Fukuro pleaded. At this, Frankie burst into open laughter. Bahahaha. I'm just kidding. I'm not gonna kill you, pal. As soon as Fukuro looked relieved, Frankie continued. We're just gonna go on a nice, romantic, balloon ride together, that's all. Quote. What? Asked Naruto. What? Asked the Frankie family. Jero. Asked Yokozuna. Oot. Asked Fukuro. And you're the balloon. Finished Frankie. His arms expanded to several times their normal size, jamming the assassin's mouth wide open in the process, and then all hell broke loose. Coup d'event. Frankie's coup d'event was a blast of air capable of sinking ships, and now he funneled it directly into Fukuro's open mouth. Agaga! He screamed, instantly expanding to 3 times his normal size, his cheeks and round torso bulging and warping from the titanic intake. Then the air escaped in one long, horrible burp that sent Fukuro flying up over the buildings, and a cackling cyborg rode the man off into the distance. Everyone left behind could only watch in shock. A long moment passed. Then, Naruto turned to the assorted figures of the Frankie family who were watching with popped eyes and dropped jaws. He brought one hand up in a wave. Well guys, have fun with that. Then he brought his hands together and disappeared. City. Nami. Nami knew she was in a bad spot. The battlefield before her was covered with patches of bubbles, and the attacks she had already sustained had smoothed away parts of her features. In particular, part of her chest and one of her forearms were now flat, shiny, and useless, which was making the use of her clean attack rather difficult. Still, she thought, looking across at the haughty woman who stood before her, she wasn't out of this fight yet. Now was the time to turn this around. She had finally figured out this woman's weaknesses, and all she needed now was a distraction. As if in response to her thoughts, a cloud of smoke burst into existence behind the assassin, who turned in shock to face the unexpected arrival. Hello, my ladies, said a smooth voice from inside the cloud. We're so sorry for keeping you both waiting, but it took a short while to finish our preparations. The smoke cleared in a suspicious gust of wind, revealing what lay underneath. As they watched, Khalifa's eyes went wide, her jaw dropping. A second later, Nami's followed. Ninpo. Gyaku harem no jutsu. Ninja art. Reverse harem technique. From inside the cloud stalked a bevy of young men, each one of them with a fit build, a devilishly handsome face, and sporting a confident smile. Some were clothed in fashion that could have come out of magazines while some were half naked, but each one of them was focusing their deadly gaze directly on the black-clad assassin. I take it we meet your approval? Asked another one, a blond boy who was beaming an innocent and defenseless grin towards the woman. It would be a shame if we failed to meet the desires of such a beautiful lady. Nami watched with an amazement that turned to horror as the small army of handsome young men descended upon the baffled Khalifa until they had her completely surrounded. Then, Nami shook her head, realizing that she was supposed to be doing something about this. Instead of gawking, she moved to complete her plan as the clones distracted the other woman. Meanwhile, the assassin had made no move to attack, spinning in place from one beautiful boy to the other, her mouth wide open in shock. Finally, she managed to settle her beating heart long enough to speak, haltingly gasping the words in a breathy voice. That's sexual harassment, she said. The clone that looked the most like Sasuke stepped in, clasping her hand in his and using the other to lift her gently resisting chin. In a sultry voice he murmured, yeah, it is. As he looked deep into her eyes, a mist of rain began to fall around them, wetting their hair and trickling beads of moisture down their faces. Khalifa had just a moment to remember that it never rained on Eni's lobby before the entirely inappropriate grips of several of the young men tightened around her. Okay. Nami, I got her. Head spinning in shock, Khalifa looked up to see Nami standing at the top of the fountain, firing a continuous jet of high-pressure wind straight into the output nozzle. Up and down the street, The ground was buckling as pipes burst from the strain, causing sprays of water to cover the whole area in a drizzle that broke down all of the woman's supernatural bubbles. In moments all of the bubbles were gone, and as the water covered her as well, the patches of Nami's skin that had earlier been smoothed away gradually expanded to their normal contours. Returned to fighting form, Nami smiled down upon them. Khalifa boggled as she struggled to escape from the firm grips of the clone harem. What is this? Playing with an innocent maiden's heart. You scum. You won't get away with this. Yeah, I'll tell you how this is going to go, started Nami, descending from the fountain one step after another. See, I'm going to pretend that none of this ever happened, and you're going to pay for trying to kill me and my friends. One of the clones who hadn't glomped over the assassin approached Nami to offer her a hand down from the rim of the fountain, which Nami ignored as she leapt down and then kicked him in the crotch. The clone disappeared with a pained expression that was soon shared by the other watching clones. Naruto, if you try that shit on me, I'll do that to your real balls, alright? The next nearest clone just laughed. You'll have to catch me, first, lady. So, what's it gonna be? Thump on the head. Lightning bolt. Nami shook her head as she stepped up in front of the wide-eyed woman who was now on her knees, 2 clones on each limb to prevent her from using her strength. No, see, I might not look it, but I think I'm the least kind among our little group. Even Zoro and Sanji don't care what they do to you so long as it gets you out of their face, but I think this situation calls for a little more than that. So, we're gonna keep this simple. In one smooth motion, Nami spun her staff down to point the end straight at the female assassin. The clones got just a moment to go wide-eyed before Nami depressed a button and a blast of flame shot from the end of the device. Holy she! Everyone in front of her screamed as the fire washed over them, Nami continuing to hold down the button until each of the clones had evaporated. When the flames finally extinguished, Khalifa crashed limply to the ground, her hair burnt off, her skin steaming, and her clothes ruined. Suddenly alone, Nami smiled, straightening her outfit and resuming her run to the city gates. City gates. Usopp and Naruto group. Rasengan! Shouted Naruto, running along while miming punching with a ball of wind in his palm. And then he went, ah. Ugh, arg, kablam zo. Wait, Naruto, what are you doing? Asked Usopp, still wearing his black Tengu mask as they continued their run to the gates. Huh, I'm doing the voices and sound effects, dude. No, with the hand thing, what was that? The Rasengan. I make this swirly ball of wind and hit people with it, like kaboom. It was hard to tell behind the mask, but Usopp's skepticism shone through nonetheless. You really think people are gonna buy that? Wind doesn't go. Kablamzo. Hey, come on, dude. It's like my ultimate attack. I even used it back at the tower. Everyone else saw it. It's super cool. Usopp rolled his eyes. Sure it is, Naruto. Well, we're making up a story anyway, so you might as well say whatever you. Screw you. Usopp laughed in response. It was even harder to stay serious since Naruto had decided to upgrade his white face paint with some red streaks. There hadn't been any particular reason for this, it had just been something that Naruto had wanted to do. Anyway, aren't you gonna take off that mask now? Asked Naruto, still sulking. What? This thing? Usopp paused, fingering its black lacquered wood surface that was adorned with red streaks, its long nose, and its evil, grinning mouth. No, you know what? I think I'll keep it. Okay. Man, suit yourself. Hey, listen, Naruto. Is everyone else alright? We don't need to get help for anyone, do we? Can you do the clone thing and look around a bit? Smiling, Naruto shook his head. No need, man. I learn everything my clones know when they disappear. The only ones still in the city are us, Nami, Zoro, and Sanji. Nami, she just won her fight, more or less, so she's coming after us. Zoro's up ahead at the gates. Sanji, I dunno about him, but I'm sure he's fine. Everyone else is out of the city and on their way to the docks. Then Naruto looked up. Oh, and there's Frankie. Frankie? Asked Usopp, that big guy from back at the tower. Where is he, and why should I care about him? No, I mean, there's Frankie. He responded, pointing into the air. Off in the distance, a cackling cyborg rode a rapidly deflating assassin like a rocket off towards the docks. Usopp watched with fascination. Wow, he exclaimed. Yeah, he's cool. Oh, and speak of the devil, we're almost at the gates now. Usopp looked down and pointed far off towards the city gates. Hey, it's Zoro. He's fighting the giraffe. There was a moment's pause as a gust of wind blew through the streets, and then both of the young men screamed. City gates. Zoro. If there was one thing that Zoro thought would never define his life, it would be dueling a giraffe to the death. Surely his path to becoming the greatest swordsman in the world wouldn't lead him to stand, bleeding from numerous wounds, before a dual-bladed giraffe. And yet, here he was. Funny how life worked sometimes. Look at you, said Kaku, looking down upon his opponent from his giraffe-granted height. I know they talk about the vitality of youth, but there are limits. You're bleeding all over, roared Zoro. Zoro said nothing, eyes closed, and his three swords at the ready as he steadied his breathing. You know, you need to start thinking about giving up. You're not getting Nico Robin out of here alive. I should know. I cut down every ship out there personally. You did what? Asked Zoro, frowning at the new information. Oh, it's just something us old-timers are used to thinking about, that's all, said the young CP9 giraffe. See, we go on and on about superhumans, or martial arts techniques, or devil fruits, but really the greatest assassination technique out there is painfully simple. He smiled, the grin wrapping itself around his oblong snout. All you have to do is destroy the ships. Pirates can only survive in this world by running, after all. Just running away whenever the authorities come. Kill any chance they had of running and they'll die, sure as eggs is eggs. Zoro's expression darkened, annoyance replacing his earlier intense focus. Just what Kaku wanted. It's the same for Nico Robin, you know. She scurried about like a rat for years and years, running onto a ship every time they had her cornered. Now that we've stopped all of you from running, this infestation is going to stop right here. Course, she never left anywhere without sticking a knife in someone's back, did she? She left with your captain, correct? Boy, I sure hope he knows to be careful. Zoro's grip tightened, teeth clenched around his sword. Yep, said Kaku, the world's gonna be a better place after she's rotting in prison. A blast of wind washed over him and down the streets, ruffling his short fur, and he blinked, his ears flicking back and forth in confusion. Something was happening to Roronoa Zoro. For a moment, Kaku perceived a sense of both intense rage and intense calm from the man in front of him. Zoro's head was down, his eyes hidden by his green bandana, but a wicked wind was shaking the air around his body, permeated throughout with a dark green energy. Blinking, Kaku tried to clear his eyes of a hallucination. It almost looked like the man had 3 heads and 6 arms, each holding a sword, but that was just ridiculous. Only after a few seconds of focus passed did he realize that it wouldn't go away. What is this? Hiki Kyuutouryu, Asura. Demon Soul 9 Sword Style, Asura. This was no illusion. Before his eyes, the hallucination solidified, waves of darkness tinged green wind pouring down over a man with 3 heads and 6 arms. In moments, Zoro began to spin, clearly preparing for some ridiculous attack. Kaku had to do something about this. Falling to the side and landing on one arm, he himself began to spin in the opposite direction, his massive neck serving as a counterweight to the most powerful spinning attack he could perform. His Rankyaku had already been a source of pride, and now with his giraffe strength it would be unbreakable. It was a pity that much of the city would likely suffer the consequences of this attack, but weakness or hesitation were luxuries that all of a sudden he could not afford. Rankyaku. Amane Dachi. Storm leg. Circumference sever. He kicked, and the world in front of him exploded in a wall of white that rushed forward to engulf the other swordsman. An instant later, the unbreakable Rankyaku broke, parting for the spinning 3-headed demon's 9 blades. Kaku stumbled in place as his attack was cancelled, and that moment of defenselessness was enough. Asura. Shin Tatsumaki Senpuu Ken. Asura. True Dragon Whirlwind Blade. Before Kaku could parse what he was seeing, Zoro became the center of a roaring cyclone of energy, writhing and clawing outwards faster and faster. Barely able to get his balance in time, Kaku jumped backwards, only just keeping ahead of its rapid expansion. Suddenly, with his back to the city walks, he leapt into the sky, cresting the tops of the ramparts and kicking off of the incoming wall of air to avoid the attack. In a moment of stomach-churning surprise, the evil winds refused to support him, and then he was pulled inside. The winds whipped him about, cutting at his skin, his clothes, and his face as Kaku struggled to escape. The roaring hurricane was a turbulent hell, with eddies of intense pressure forming directly next to sudden vacuums, and he just couldn't get out. It was actively resisting his escape. Flying around and around, the attack seemed to be covering a not insignificant section of the city, tearing buildings into rubble that slammed against his hardened body. He winced, fighting to regain control or even to orient himself upwards. He couldn't take this much longer. Gathering his will for one intense effort, he performed a giraffe-powered Geppo straight inwards, aiming for the eye of the storm. He broke through the wall with surprising ease, and there was peace at the heart of it all. All except for in one place. Zoro was waiting for him balanced on the point of a toppled boulder, all 6 eyes closed. Then his eyes opened, each head turning upward to stare at the intruder as he breached the wall. His body was covered in an aura of black and viridian, each of his 9 swords warping from the distortion of strange winds that were coiling about him. Kaku drew his blades, summoning his energy to defend himself as he turned his fall into an attack, kicking off the air to dive straight into the chaotic storm of energy around the other swordsman. For a moment even that chaos was calm. Everything became as silence. Zoro leapt into the sky without a single noise. Not from the windstorm, or the drawn blades, or the beating of blood in their ears. Both swordsmen struck, the steel refusing to ring as their blades clashed in the deathly quiet. They passed. Kaku landed. Time seemed to stand still as Kaku took stock of their shared stroke. He had bled Roronoa Zoro, sneaking a blade between the man's 9 swords, but none of Zoro's attacks had hurt him in return. He had won. Kaku turned with a sneer, seeing the bleeding form of Zoro step down to the ground. The giraffe released his Tekai, preparing to finish the job. The windstorm walls collapsed around them. Then, Zoro sheathed his blades, one after another, as the sounds of the storm and combat returned in one crashing wave of wind and steel. Asura. Kuroudai. Asura. 9 great elders. In unison with the sounds of the crashing storm, Kaku was struck 9 times in quick succession, overwhelming his attempts to regain his iron form. Each strike cut deep into his hide, arriving in time with a blast of wind that crushed him in one direction after another. Flying back and forth, he finally returned to human form as the last blade was sheathed, collapsing in a bleeding heap. Aside from sheathing his swords, Zoro had remained motionless. A demon stood among the falling rubble. One blink and then a man stood in his place, blood dripping to the ground. Without a word, Zoro turned to the ruins of the formerly great city gates, which had been torn completely from their place to fall in pieces to the ocean below. Placing one tired foot after the other, the man passed over the threshold to find his friends. Off in the distance, Usopp and Naruto emerged from a pile of rubble, spitting out the large quantities of brick dust they had captured in their open-mouthed staring. So it was that the Enies Lobby invasion force returned to the city gates. Enies Lobby support bridge. Luffy. In the distance, a crowd gathered. As each of the warriors assaulting Enies Lobby finished their fights, they returned here, and now every one of them was cheering Luffy or jeering his opponent. Of course, none of them would dare try to cross the thin finger of land that supported the island while Luffy and Lucci were engaged in their superhuman duel, so instead they watched and waited. Luffy, shouted the high and reedy voice of Usopp, face still hidden by his Tengu mask, beat him. Then we're all going home. Luffy smiled, still panting and out of breath, but Lucci just laughed. Look at them, Straw Hat. They think they've won. They've fought through Enies Lobby, and now they think they're in the home stretch. But you and I know better, don't we? As Luffy's stare focused, Lucci's lips twitched upward, exposing his teeth. I'll say it again. This is the only battle that really mattered. None of that lot can stop me, not even working together, so the conclusion should be clear. When this battle is over, he said, his eyes filled with a murderous lust, I will go over there and slaughter every single one of them. Summoning new reserves of strength, Luffy screamed to the sky, his body once again entering the high-powered state of Gear Second. He attacked, and even 100 feet away his sweeping foot arrived in the blink of an eye. Gomu Gomu no Jet Whip. Lucci leapt over the attack and prepared to close the distance between them once again, but then Luffy appeared above him, his face a mask of rage. Suddenly face to face, both fighters struck at the same time. At the sidelines, the observers felt the shockwave wash over them. Lucci fell like a meteorite, making a crater in the earth of the rock pillar, while Luffy flew far up into the sky. Then, Luffy screamed, and this time everyone heard it. All across the island, fighting stopped. The Frankie family, Galila workers, and the assembled Straw Hats looked up, mouths open. At the docks, Flounders and Sasuke turned in surprise. On a stage inside a conference building, Kumadori faltered in the performance of his 17th consecutive suicide scene, unsure of what had distracted him. Far in the air, Luffy took a deep breath, blood streaming from his wounds. The whipping winds filled his lungs, and then he bit down into his thumb joint. Gear third. Blowing fiercely into his own body, the bones and muscles in his arm expanded to gargantuan size. Whereas normally the addition of air would lower the density of his body, the magic of the fruit scaled up his limbs' mass to reflect its increased volume, allowing him to expand his muscles and bones in all directions at the same time. As he shouted wordlessly at the world below, Luffy's silhouette expanded to 50 times that of its original size. Below, many of the assembled onlookers turned and ran, now beginning to worry about things such as minimum safe distance from the impact of what looked like a very dangerous attack. High above, Luffy stretched, his left leg shooting straight up to the clouds. With a constriction of muscles, the air passed into his torso, inflating him like a balloon. Finally, tearing his clothes, the air traveled into his foot. As his sandals exploded, his right leg became the size of a house and just as massive. Roaring his attack, he brought his cloud-touched foot down towards the rock isthmus below him. Gomu Gomu no Gigant Pile Driver. The foot descended, and Rob Lucci snarled, whipping his head upwards, his leopard fur matted with blood and dirt. He stood at the thinnest part of the great rock bridge that supported Enies lobby itself, and there was limited room to move. Seeing the giant's foot approaching, he stood up and raised both hands, solidifying his body with his most powerful defense. Tekkai. Go. Fierce iron body. He took the stamping strike on both hands, his teeth slamming together from the force of the impact. Then, abruptly, the ground gave way beneath him and Rob Lucci was driven like a steel rivet down into the rock below him. Luffy's foot dug a deep crater, but Lucci dug in even deeper. His remaining clothes tore themselves to shreds on the rocks, but his body refused to give out, cutting further and further into the bedrock. Finally he came to rest 100 feet below ground level, surrounded by rock on all sides. At the moment he released his Tekkai, he immediately coughed up a bit of blood, his bones shaking to recover from the immense compression they had just been forced into. Doing a quick inventory of his physical state, he found that his legs had been broken. More importantly, the rock around him was crushingly tight, trapping him in place. Struggling, he fought to move, buried deep in the earth with absolutely no leverage. Above him, he could hear the stomping and cheering that signified that every one of the pirates and thugs trapped at the city gates were now thundering past, as well as a few larger crashes that must have been the giants. As the rumbling vibration continued, dirt showered down the cracks in the earth, pouring over him until it was packed in tighter and tighter. He couldn't breathe. After the exhausting fight, he could only struggle for a breath that wouldn't come. With desperation he thrust his arms an inch or two from side to side, shattering the stone around him, but this only allowed even more dirt to pour in to replace it. His lungs were bursting. He could not breathe. Was this how the story of the greatest fighter in the history of CP9 would end? He was going to die of suffocation, being trampled to death by ants. With little freedom to move, none of the 6 techniques were suited to getting him out of this before he fell unconscious. No. Wait. There was one. Slowly, he reformed his fists, bringing them slightly forward through the cascading dirt. Rokushiki Ougi, Rokuougan, Saidaairin. 6 techniques ultimate. 6 King's Gun, greatest ring. Lucci's leopard fist shot forward, needing only an inch to accelerate to the proper speed, the force of his attack traveling in a supreme wave up and outward, shattering rock all around him. The king technique of his arsenal obliterated a tremendous arc of stone, converting it to dust and freeing him from its prison. This may have been a mistake. Above ground, the island shook again, and a fountain of rock and dirt exploded from the impact crater. Shockwaves spread all around as the mountain-shattering strike spread its devastation. To describe the noise that echoed across the island at that moment as a snapping would be entirely misleading. Pencils snap. Bones snap. Trees snap. Islands aren't supposed to snap. Lucci felt the moment when the rock to one side of him shifted, and then the island of Eni's lobby slipped a few inches off kilter. A moment later, the rock pillar that supported the island gave way completely. As the rock opened up to air behind him, Lucci scrabbled in the falling dirt, lacking anything to grab hold of. He gasped, finally able to breathe, and it had been the most destructive breath ever taken by a human being. Screaming in rage, the final defender of CP9 fell, and the island fell with him. As the judicial island plummeted into the ocean, anything that didn't involve staring in shocked horror at the spectacle stopped dead. Jaws were dropped, screams were voiced, and especially on the island itself pants were wet. Then it hit bottom. The noise of a mountain-sized boulder striking the rocky, hole-riddled sea floor was deafening. A titanic cracking sound signaled the breaking of some of the complicated structures underneath the island, followed by a cresting splash of water that erupted in a ring some 2 miles wide and more than a mile into the air, coming down as a rain that shrouded the everyday island in its first darkness in ages. From her position at the island gates, Robin watched the mighty fortress literally fall into the ocean with her mouth open in confusion. Above all of the destruction loomed the barely visible shadow of the gates of justice that covered the horizon, barely visible through the clouds and blue sky. It was a monument to the power of the world government even now. But, in the end, the Straw Hats had gone up against the world for her, and the world had lost. In the distance, every one of the invaders was charging back down the path on the way to the docks. Usopp had picked up Luffy as they ran back, their young captain being completely immobilized after the stress of his attack. Despite him being unable to move, Robin could still make out his voice all the way from here as he screamed at the top of his lungs. ROOOOOBIIIN. We're going home. Omake. CP9 Chief Spandam exploded from underneath the churning waters of the ocean pit, grasping and clinging onto one of the immense pieces of driftwood that littered the waters. Miraculously, he had managed to survive. Gagging, he coughed up seawater until he could breathe once more. Those idiots. I'll have them all executed. He shouted, gasping and coughing. I know people. I'll make sure those incompetent assassins get bounties. They'll be hunted till the day they die. No, wait, I still have the golden Den Mushi. I can make them all pay. Startled out of his enraged trance, Spandam noticed the sky darkening. Funny, it wasn't ever supposed to be nighttime on this island. He looked up. Spandam had 3 seconds to scream as the entire island of Eni's lobby crashed down on top of his head, and he used all of them to their fullest.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.